the afternoon I came home from Loblaws and found my bedroom door standing open, and the room beyond it completely emptied. I stood in the hallway for a full minute before I could make myself move. My bed was gone, my dresser, gone. The framed photograph of my late husband Hugh standing at the helm of his brother's sailboat on Georgian Bay, gone. What remained was a bare wood floor, and erecting was a bare wood paint where the headboard had rested against the wall for 26 years. My son Duncan was walking out of the kitchen when I turned around. "Mum," he said quietly. He wouldn't look at me. "Don't be upset." I've noticed that people only say those words when they've already done something upsetting. My name is Joan Hartley. I am 64 years old, and until that November afternoon in Barrie, Ontario, I thought the hardest chapter of my life had already been written. My husband Hugh died 11 years ago. Pancreatic cancer, 4 months from diagnosis to the last morning, I held his hand. He was 59. He had planned to retire the following spring and finish the canoe he had been building in his workshop downstairs. He never did. I spent the first year after losing him moving through the house, like someone trying to navigate in the dark, reaching for things that were no longer where they had always been. But I managed. I kept the house. I kept the hydro paid and the pipes from freezing each January, which in Barrie requires more determination than most people who have never lived through a Georgian Bay winter would understand. I took on part-time bookkeeping work from my home office. I grew a vegetable garden that Hugh would have said was too ambitious for the yard. It was. I kept it anyway. And I believed the hardest part of my life was behind me. That is the thought I hold now, with something close to wonder, because I was so completely wrong. It began the way these things always do. Not with a single dramatic moment, but with a phone call that sounded entirely reasonable. My son Duncan called on a Wednesday evening in late February. He and his wife, Nicole, had been married for 6 years. They lived in a townhouse in Newmarket and ran a small landscaping company that had done well for 3 seasons running. I liked Nicole. She had given me a handmade cutting board as a housewarming gift when I finally converted Hugh's study into a proper guest room. She was organized and capable, and always arrived for Sunday dinners with something she had baked herself. "Mum, we're in trouble," Duncan said. It wasn't the voice he used when he exaggerated. It was the voice I remembered from when he was 12 and had broken the neighbor's greenhouse window with a baseball. "The winter wiped us out. We lost 3 contracts and the truck needs a new transmission. We're 2 months behind on rent." He didn't have to ask twice. I told him to come home. They arrived the following Saturday with their son Finn, who was 9 years old, and immediately asked if he could help me plant things when the snow melted. Of course he could. That first month, the house felt genuinely full in a way it hadn't since before Hugh's diagnosis. Finn ate his cereal at the kitchen table while I made his lunch. Duncan fixed the back fence that I had been meaning to deal with since August. Nicole reorganized my pantry in a way I hadn't asked for, but grudgingly admitted made more sense. I told myself this was what family did. The first sign was small enough that I nearly talked myself out of noticing it. In April, I came home from my Tuesday morning walk with my friend Shirley McPhee to find that my reading armchair, the old wingback that had belonged to Hugh's mother, had been moved from the living room to the upstairs hallway. Nicole was rearranging the sitting area for a new sectional they had ordered. "I hope that's all right," she said. Her voice had the particular cheerfulness of someone who had already decided it was. I said it was fine. I moved the chair back that evening after everyone had gone to bed. The next morning, it was in the hallway again. I let it stay. I told myself it wasn't important. Hugh had always said I held on to objects too tightly. Maybe he was right. But the armchair was only the beginning of a longer lesson I did not yet understand I was being taught. Over the following months, Nicole developed a habit of redecorating that expanded quietly but steadily, the way water finds its way under a foundation. My kitchen curtains were replaced because they let in too much afternoon glare. The dishes Hugh and I had collected over years of roadside antique shops were packed away in favor of a matching white set Nicole bought on sale. The photographs along the staircase wall were taken down because she was planning to repaint. The painting never happened. The photographs did not go back up. Duncan rarely said anything. When I raised a concern, He had a way of nodding slowly and then doing nothing, as though the nod itself were a form of resolution. I made excuses for him. He was tired. He was stressed. He was figuring out how to rebuild the business. What I didn't notice, or perhaps refused to notice, was that he had stopped making decisions of his own. If Nicole suggested something, it happened. If I suggested something, Duncan would glance toward her before he answered. That particular pause, the fraction of a second before my son spoke to me in my own kitchen, became the sound I dreaded most. Shirley noticed it before I would admit it to myself. We met every Tuesday for coffee at the Tim Hortons on Bayfield, and one morning in July she looked at me over her double-double and said, "You don't look like yourself, Joan." I told her I was tired. "You look like someone who's been apologizing for taking up space in their own home." I laughed. I changed the subject. I thought about her words all the way home and did not stop thinking about them for weeks. The basement workshop was the one place in the house that remained entirely as Hugh had left it. The door had a padlock because Hugh had been careful about his tools, and the only key was on a ring I kept in my jewelry drawer. Nicole's had asked about it once, in the first month. Storage, I told her. Tools. She didn't press further. I had the feeling that anything she could not reorganize or replace held limited interest for her. The workshop was cluttered and smelled of sawdust and linseed oil, and was therefore invisible to her plans. I had not opened that door in 4 years. After Hugh died, I had gone in once, stayed 10 minutes, and then locked it again. Some rooms hold a person so completely that opening the door feels like disturbing sleep. The afternoon I came home to find my bedroom emptied, and my life relocated to the cold storage room beside the furnace, I went downstairs. Not to the storage room, to the workshop door. I stood with my hand on the padlock for a long time. Then I went back upstairs and asked Duncan to explain. He was in the kitchen. Nicole sat at the island with her laptop open. Together, they explained that I no longer needed to climb the stairs each night, that the basement room was warm enough once the furnace kicked in, that it was only temporary while they converted the main bedroom for their use. Duncan said it would make things easier. Nicole said it was the most practical arrangement. I noticed she had stopped referring to the house as my house sometime in June. By November, it had become simply the house, which is how you speak about a place you've already decided belongs to you. I slept in the storage room for 11 nights. I counted. Finn brought me a blanket the second evening and sat with me for an hour looking at old photographs I had packed in a box. He pointed to a picture of Hugh standing at his workbench, holding up a birdhouse he had just finished. "Did Grandpa build things?" he asked. "Everything in this house that matters," I told him. He nodded very seriously. "Children understand more than adults give them credit for. What they don't understand is that they reveal more than they intend to." On the 8th day, Finn came to find me in the backyard where I was raking the last of the maple leaves. He had grass stains on his jeans and was carrying his hockey stick. "Grandma," he said, "are we going to move to a cottage?" I put down the rake. "What cottage?" He shrugged, the way children shrug when they've wandered into a conversation they only partly understand. Dad was talking about a place on Lake Simcoe. He said, after the house sells, there'll be enough for something nicer. After the house sells. I raked leaves for another 20 minutes after Finn went inside. Then I walked to Hugh's workshop and unlocked the door. I had not opened that door expecting to find anything more than old tools and grief. But Hugh had been a precise man. He planned things. He repaired the back fence the autumn before he got sick, knowing, without saying, so that he wouldn't be there to fix it in the spring. He had a habit of preparation that I had always thought was about objects, about wood and nails, and making things that would outlast him. Standing inside the workshop for the first time in 4 years, I understood that the habit went deeper than tools. On the shelf above his workbench, between a tin of linseed oil and a coffee can of wood screws, sat a small cedar box with a brass clasp. I recognized it. Hugh had built it the winter before he got sick, and when I had asked what it was for, he had said important papers. I had assumed he meant the car insurance and the extended TID warranties for his table saw. I had never opened it. Inside was a sealed envelope. My name was written on the front in Hugh's handwriting, and underneath it, in smaller letters, "For when you need it." I sat on his workbench stool and read the letter 3 times. Hugh had not been sentimental about legal matters. The letter was clear and direct, the way he was clear and direct about everything from grout lines to driving directions. He had visited a lawyer named Peter Dunmore at Dunmore & Associates on Collier Street 2 weeks before his death. He had registered a life estate on the property with the Ontario Land Registry. The house would remain in my name as life tenant. I had the right to live in it for the remainder of my life. It could not be sold, transferred, or mortgaged without my consent. Not by Duncan. Not by anyone. He had told Peter Dunmore to expect my calls if I ever needed it, and he had left the lawyer's card paper clipped to the back of the letter. I put everything back in the cedar box. I carried it upstairs and locked it in my jewelry drawer. That evening, I moved my bed back upstairs myself. Nobody stopped me. The next morning, I called Peter Dunmore. He was older than I expected, 70 at least, with the careful voice of someone who had delivered difficult news many times and learned exactly how much silence to leave around it. "Mrs. Hartley," he said, when I told him who I was. "Hugh asked me to keep this file open as long as necessary." A pause. "I'm sorry it became necessary." I asked if he could come to the house. He said he could come that afternoon. I did not tell Duncan or Nicole he was coming. Duncan was in the backyard when Peter Dunmore's car pulled into the driveway. Nicole was making notes at the kitchen island. She looked up when I opened the door to a gray-haired man in a wool coat carrying a briefcase. "Who is this?" she asked. "This is Peter Dunmore," I said. "He was Hugh's lawyer." I watched the expression on Nicole's face change in the way expressions change when a comfortable certainty suddenly becomes uncertain. Peter Dunmore settled his briefcase on the kitchen table and opened it without any particular urgency. Duncan came inside. He looked from me to the lawyer to Nicole, and I watched him try to read the room. Peter Dunmore explained the life estate registration in plain language. He had done this many times and knew how to say it simply. "I own the right to live in this house until my death. No sale could proceed without my documented consent. Any attempt to coerce or pressure me into granting that consent would be actionable in court." He used the word actionable, the way Hugh would have used the word load-bearing to describe something you could not simply decide to ignore. Nicole said there must be a mistake. Peter Dunmore opened the certified copy of the land registration and placed it on the table. Nicole said she hadn't known. Peter Dunmore looked at her steadily. "Most people don't," he said, "until they need to." Duncan sat down heavily in a kitchen chair. He was looking at the document, and then at the table, and then at nothing in particular. "Dad did this," he said. "It wasn't a question." "Your father registered it about 2 weeks before he died," Peter Dunmore confirmed. "He was very specific about what he wanted it to accomplish." Duncan put both hands over his face. "I didn't know." "I believe you," I said, "and I meant it." Nicole did not take the news the way Duncan did. She was quiet for a long moment, and then she said, calmly, that she needed to speak with Duncan privately. She picked up her laptop and walked to the living room. The conversation they had was not particularly private. The house, as I have said, has good acoustics. What I heard told me more about the state of their marriage than anything Nicole had ever said directly. She had assumed the house. She had planned around the house. She had borrowed against the expectation of the house. Something I would only fully understand 2 weeks later when Duncan sat across from me at the kitchen table and showed me the credit statements he had found in her desk drawer. Accounts opened in both their names. Balances I had not imagined possible. Debt that explained the desperation behind the renovation plans in a way that simple greed never quite had. Nicole had not come from a cruel place. She had come from a frightened one, and fear, when it goes unnamed for long enough, learns to disguise itself as ambition. That didn't make what happened right, but it made it human. Nicole left on a Sunday morning. She packed 3 bags and put them in the car herself. At the front door, she turned to Duncan and said something in a low voice that I did not try to hear. He stood with his hands in his pockets and watched her drive away. Finn sat beside me on the front steps. "Is Mom coming back?" I didn't know how to answer that. "I think your mum and your dad need some time to figure things out," I said. He leaned his shoulder against mine. We watched a squirrel argue with the bird feeder Hugh had built the summer before Finn was born. The weeks that followed were quiet in the particular way that comes after a long noise stops. Duncan moved into the guest room. He was home every evening. He cooked dinner without being asked. He went through the credit statements with a financial counselor and called Nicole's accounts one by one. He did not ask me again about the house. He did not ask to see Hugh's letter. What he did instead was fix the loose step on the back porch that had been loose for 2 years and drive Finn to hockey practice every Tuesday and Thursday. And one afternoon he came upstairs with a box of photographs and asked me if I could help him remember where they went on the staircase wall. We spent 3 hours on it. We argued about whether the sailing photograph went above or below the one from Finn's first Christmas. We were both right, depending on how you looked at it. The photograph of Hugh on Georgian Bay went back in its place. I stood in front of it after Duncan had gone to put Finn to bed, and I thought about the morning I had stood in Hugh's workshop, reading a letter written by a man who knew he was dying and had spent some of his remaining time making sure that nobody could take his wife's home away from her. He hadn't done it because he expected the worst of Duncan. He had done it because he understood people and because he understood me, that I would give and give and give until there was nothing left to give, and that someone needed to quietly ensure there was a floor I could not fall through. A few weeks later, on a Saturday in early December, when the first real snow of the year was coming down over the maple in the front yard, I went back to the workshop. Duncan followed me. He didn't ask permission. I didn't tell him to stop. We stood together, looking at the tools in their rows on the pegboard. Duncan ran his hand along the edge of the half-built canoe that had been sitting there for 11 years, still waiting to be finished. He was going to take us out on Kempenfelt Bay, he said. He talked about it all the time. I know. Duncan looked at the canoe for a long time. I'd like to finish it, he said. If that's okay. I didn't answer right away. I looked at the tin of linseed oil, the coffee can of screws, the cedar box back on its shelf where it belonged. You'll need to learn the right way to do it, I said finally. Hugh had very specific ideas about how things were supposed to go. Duncan nodded. I'll figure it out. And then quietly, I'm sorry, Mum, for all of it. I turned off the workshop light. I know you are. We walked upstairs together. Finn was at the kitchen table, building something out of his grandfather's old wooden blocks, concentrating the way children concentrate when they are certain they are doing something important. He looked up when we came in. Can we make hot chocolate? He asked. We can, I told him. The 3 of us stood around the stove while the milk warmed. Outside, the snow was coming down steadily now, covering the yard in the deep quiet that a Georgian Bay winter brings. The maple tree in the front yard was disappearing into white. The bird feeder was full. Hugh had built that bird feeder from scraps. He had told me it would outlast the house. I didn't believe him at the time. Standing at my own stove, in my own kitchen, with my son beside me and my grandson on his tiptoes reaching for the cocoa tin, I believe him now.